Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today I wanted to do another installment of the Is It Worth Doing series, today starring something a little bit different, and that is an entire world and an entire side world being Grizzleheim. Now obviously on every other versions of this I've done dungeons or like specific areas of the game. I've never done anything quite this size, but I figured that this one's actually worth doing because a lot of people actually question, is it worth doing Grizzleheim as a whole? Grizzleheim and Wintertusk, it will include both. What I plan on doing in this video is I plan on kind of splitting it up. So this first part, I'm just going to talk about Grizzleheim, what Grizzleheim is, how long it is, how each street is, and then I'm going to go into is it worth doing? Then I'm going to go into Wintertusk and do Wintertusk. So I leave chapters in every single video, so if you want to skip to the Wintertusk section, go ahead and do so right now. But otherwise, let's get into the video with is Grizzleheim worth doing? So the first thing about Grizzleheim is you unlock Grizzleheim at level 20. Technically, you go to it at level 5. You need to do the quest Bear Market first, given to you by Balder Goldpaws, I believe. Basically, it's just a lot of talking, and then you go to Grizzleheim and kind of explore the area. It's pretty interesting. It's a short little quest that you can do at level 5, but it isn't until level 20 that you actually unlock the world itself. Now, the interesting thing about Grizzleheim that's important to note is that Grizzleheim is actually leveled. So while you unlock Grizzleheim at level 20, you can't actually do Vigrid-Ruffland until level 30, you can't do Mercombe Keep until level 35, and you can't do Ravenscar until level 40. So if you're looking to do all of Grizzleheim in one go, you need to wait until level 40 to do it. Now, as you can see here, Grizzleheim has a total of 68 quests, which are 15 regular mob fights, 11 defeat and collect, and 31 boss battles. Grizzleheim isn't actually that long, I would say. I would say the longest part of it is Ravenscar, but I'll go into that more later. But honestly, it's not that difficult. You can look up this quest guide. This is Final Bastion's quest guide. I always look up Final Bastion quest guides when I'm questing. So if this interests you, I'll leave it in the description below. But otherwise, let's actually get into the streets and how difficult each one are. So first things first, and how I'm going to go about this is I'm going to just kind of talk broadly about each street, how long it takes, and kind of any interesting challenges throughout it. I'm not going to actually like show off any battles or anything because this video would take way too long if I did that. So without further ado, let's get into the actual streets themselves. Starting out, Saverstead Pass, again, you unlock this at level 20. This street, I would say, is probably one of the shorter ones. It's only about 15 quests long. Nothing too major in of itself. There's 5 or 6 boss fights. Nothing crazy. This one, again, is designed for level 20s. If you're doing this at any level above level 20, it is going to feel really easy. The enemies only have a few hundred health each, and that includes bosses. The hardest boss there might only have around 1,000 health. Like, it is probably Marleybone or less level. It's not that bad. This street may take you about 40 minutes on a level 20 character, but if you're doing this at level 40 or anything above level 20, if you even have just a 4-pip AoE, this is probably only going to take about 20 minutes to do. It is not a long street in of itself. Interesting parts about Saverstead Pass, I'd say the only really interesting thing is this is where you can farm 4 rat spin spell elements, but that obviously doesn't make Grizzleheim in of itself worth doing, but it is there if you're interested. It's behind the waterfall, like when you first walk in. Just an interesting little thing. So you've beaten Saverstead Pass. Next up is Vigrid-Ruffland, and for Vigrid-Ruffland, the whole thing is you're trying to find Ivar Anderson. I don't remember why, but that's what you're doing. You go there at level 30. This place actually isn't too interesting. This is one of the shorter areas. Only takes like maybe 10 minutes longer than Saverstead Pass, to be completely honest. I'd say the two main interesting parts of it is the fact that there is a tower that is about 7 floors long, so be ready for that. And on top of that, there's also a dungeon called Frostholm in it. So I'm sure most people remember Frostholm. It's a dungeon. It's not that long of a dungeon, but it definitely makes Vigrid-Ruffland take about 10 to 20 minutes longer than Saverstead Pass. Next thing you unlock is Mercombe Keep at level 35. Mercombe Keep isn't actually too long. I would say it's actually slightly shorter than Vigrid-Ruffland. You just go through it fighting some bosses. A lot of it is kind of bosses in this street, to be completely honest, but nothing too challenging. Some enemies have about 2,000 to 3,000 health though, so do be careful with that, but it's not really anything too much of value. If you just have a feint and like maybe 2 blades, you're going to be good on literally every single enemy. It's nothing too bad. But now we're into the parts of Grizzleheim that I'm sure everyone knows and hates, and the worst parts of it. The first 3 streets are easy, and you can beat them in about 2 hours collectively if you're around, like, say, level 40 when you do it. Alright, so next up, you finally meet the king, and the king is like, okay, you need to actually prove yourself worthy of helping my people, so you need to come down here to Nidavellir and defeat Jotun. Now, this quest is actually significantly problematic compared to every other quest in this world for a few reasons. First off, the Jotun fight is Jotun Jotun, 2 more bosses of similar health, and finally a side minion. That is a 1v4 if you're trying to solo this, and each boss has 6,000 to 7,000 health. That is a lot of health. For this one, I would recommend using team up, but and I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure if you beat these 2 side dungeons right here and you defeat their bosses, I think, I could be wrong, that the 2 bosses that I said beside Jotun don't actually appear, and it's just Jotun. So that's an interesting way to go about it. I would say that the main thing realistically you're just going to do here is probably press team up if you're solo, because I don't think going through the other dungeons is necessarily worth it, but you can if you want to and make that Jotun fight a little bit easier. But once you beat that, you're finally able to gain the trust of the king, and this is when you can finally do Ravenscar. And Ravenscar, I'm sure, is the most well-known and well-hated street of Grizzleheim because it is the longest and it is by far the worst. To put it into perspective, when boosting myself with a max level, as I've done this before, it takes the same amount of time to do Ravenscar as it takes to do the rest of Grizzleheim combined, and that's with boosting a max level. It takes over an hour. This street is actually a hellscape. You can see here, if you look at it on the map, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bosses that you need to fight. Now, I will say, technically, you don't need to beat Frostmantle. I think you can avoid his fight if you have someone else join it and you can run around, but most people are going to fight him. And on top of that, this fight right here has 4 bosses. This fight is a solo boss fight, so you can't even have people help you if you want to. So this street is definitely very difficult, and that's not even putting on top of it the multiple defeat and collect quests that have a very low drop rate. So this street is long and agonizing. It's going to take you about an hour to do, probably in most cases. The things of interest that you might want to note here is, first off, every boss has 3,000 to 4,000 health. Gurtok, I believe, has 6,000 health, so even more than that. On top of that, this Gurtok fight is completely solo. This fight has 4 bosses. So realistically, if you're doing this game solo, those are going to be an issue. Obviously, the final one you can just team up, but this one you're probably going to need to know how to feint stack, or figure out how to feint stack in some case, maybe using a TC feint, something along those lines. Otherwise, it is not going to be easy to beat him. But that is really this street in of itself, and that leads us with the question, is Grizzleheim worth doing? Now, Grizzleheim is notorious for one thing and one thing alone, and that is its very low XP. Grizzleheim doesn't even give you enough to gain a full level, I think, at level 20. I could be wrong, but I think if you do this at level 40, you definitely won't gain a single level doing the entirety of Grizzleheim, which kind of sucks considering Ravenscar is actually genuinely difficult and genuinely painful. In terms of drops, there is nothing interesting in all of Grizzleheim that you can really go for, so it's not worth doing in that regard. But for the question, is it worth doing? The answer is actually yes, and I'll say that there's 2 main reasons for it. The first, and the kind of smaller one of the 2, is Eric Weirdrune here has actually 2 quests in him that have some good rewards in the form of spells. This is where you learn Dark Pact, and it's also where I believe you learn Bad Juju. This is where you learn Shatter as a myth. This is where you learn Fuel as a fire. A lot of spells that are actually really, really good are learned from Eric Weirdrune here, and you need to have done Grizzleheim to actually unlock him. You get them at level 35 and 55, so pretty interesting, and this also unlocks the level 75 spell in Avalon. So that is important to actually do. It is right here, and it's one of the reasons why Grizzleheim is worth it. But for the second reason, and this is the bigger one, is it unlocks Wintertusk. Wintertusk, as you'll find out, is definitely worth doing for so many reasons. I'm going to go into them more later, but definitely you're going to want to do it for Wintertusk. Personally, Grizzleheim, I would recommend doing it at around level 44 when you first finish Dragonspire. I'd recommend doing this immediately after Dragonspire before Celestia, along with Wintertusk, because it gets you at a nice little higher point for Celestia and kind of evens out the playing field and makes Celestia, which is a little bit of a hard world, just a little bit easier. So that's what I would recommend doing, but that should really answer the question. I would say yes, it's worth doing for a lot of reasons. Let's move on to actually Wintertusk itself, and is Wintertusk worth doing? So next up is Wintertusk. Wintertusk has 51 quests in total, and it has a final dungeon of Nastrond. There's 20 boss battles, 5 mob quests, and 6 defeat and collect quests. Again, this is a total of 51, nothing too huge, and then obviously Nastrond is probably probably a little bit longer. You can okay, you can see here instance there's like 6 quests, but the point is that is Wintertusk as a whole. Now, similar to Grizzleheim, it has 4 streets: Osterland, Vesterland, Sudgerland, and Nordgerland. I would say that these streets go by pretty fast. Now, this is actually going to be quite a bit more difficult than Grizzleheim if you're doing this at level 40. I would heavily recommend you have a way to feint stack in these streets, because otherwise you're going to be screwed, or have a questing partner. Now, going into it, I would say Osterland isn't too bad. This is one of the longer of the streets. Nothing too crazy in of itself here. You just kind of go around defeating some things, beating the 3 challenges of Ostry. It's not too bad of a street. The main interests here are probably just bosses. There isn't anything too crazy. Next up is Vesterland. Vesterland has a lot of goodies. It is a greener area. It looks very beautiful. This street, I will say, be careful. There is a lot more bosses here than any other street, so be very careful with that. It's actually quite a longer one, I would say. There's like 7-8 bosses there. Do be careful there. Sudgerland, next up, is not actually that bad. There is like a defeat and collect quest, but a lot of it is not that bad. Sudri actually gives you his golden seal pretty easily. And finally, Nordgerland is the easiest of them, only being like 4 quests long, and I believe it's just 3 riddles. You don't even need to fight anything, I say tentatively. You might need to fight 1 or 2 things, but honestly, Nordgerland is not bad in of itself in the slightest. And then finally, you have Nastrond. Nastrond is the tree down here under Grandmother Raven, and this is actually the difficult dungeon in of itself. So the important thing to note here is that this dungeon has quite a few boss fights, and you're probably going to need help to do this. And by probably, I mean definitely. You're not going to be soloing this at around level 50 when you do this. It is pretty long and pretty hard, to be completely honest. All right, so finally I'm going to go into the final fight of this, because this fight is actually a toughie and you're going to want to know how to do it. So first off, Nordry will cast a -65 tower shield on himself at the start of the duel. This shield is replaced each round. Later in the duel, he will start casting a -90 instead of a -65. Pierce, Shatter, and Steel Ward can be used to remove the tower shield, but will still trigger the tag cheat. When the other 3 brothers are defeated, he will remove his shield permanently. Tag, you're it. At the start of the fight, one of the bosses will cast a stun shield on a random brother. Wizards should only focus on casting spells at the boss with the stun shield. Wrong brother, I'm it. Casting spells at any of the other 3 bosses without stun shield will trigger and interrupt attack at the end of the round. Multi-target, all enemy attacks will not trigger this cheat. So for this dungeon, you're going to want to use multi-target spells almost exclusively. I'd recommend 4-pip AoEs, 7-pip AoEs, really any just form of AoEs. This cheat will stop if Nordry's defeated. Tag, I'm it. Every 3rd round, Nordry remove all wards from the brother with the stun block. It is safe to attack any of the 4 bosses for 1 round before they say tag, you're it again. This cheat will end when Nordry's defeated. Finally, Nordry uses an enchanted version of Meteor Strike, which deals 500 fire damage. You hurt my brothers. If all his brothers have been defeated, Nordry will sometimes cheat cast the spell every 3rd round. But that is really the cheats in of itself. They're nothing too challenging. Hopefully there isn't anything that would kind of hamper you there. I'd recommend just using your AoE and kind of going through it. Nothing too bad in of itself, and with that, you've defeated Wintertusk and stopped the Everwinter. So now let's get into the part of the video that I'm sure a lot of people were also waiting for. Is Wintertusk worth doing? Now, Wintertusk is a hard yes from me for so many reasons. I would recommend doing this again right after Dragonspire, and the reason for that is that level 44 feels pretty weak to go into Celestia. Celestia has some tough enemies, especially mid to late way through. You're going to want to be a bit of a higher level to do this, and I would highly recommend being a higher level to do this. And perfectly, that lines up with the fact that you can do Wintertusk here. Wintertusk, if you do it, will make you go from level 44 to around level 56 or somewhere in there. I usually do every single side quest, so I usually go up to 58 or so. It is really good and a decent way to do it. There isn't that many side quests in this street. I would recommend it if you've never done it before. It's just a fun little way, and you can end up getting Waterworks gear not very far into Celestia. But what does this world have to offer? First off, it has a lot of XP, which is really, really good. Again, you're going to gain about 10 to 12 levels here. A really big boost from where you would be if you hadn't done Wintertusk. On top of that, this world has some of the absolute best gold farming options and just gold in general. After doing this world, you're probably going to go from, say you had 0 gold, you're probably going to get at least 100k worth of drops throughout just this entire thing without farming anything. On top of that, Vesterland, as you probably know, has Halfang, which is still widely considered one of the best gold farming spots. I know that there's like some fishing options. You don't need to tell me the other gold farming options. I know them. But this is definitely one of the best earlier game gold farming options and still one of the better late game ones. So Halfang is here in Vesterland if you want it. And finally, I know some school quests also involve doing Wintertusk, so there is just a lot of reasons to do it. This world is worth doing in of itself, and I would say that every single time. You can skip it, you can just go into Celestia and not do it, but I would highly recommend doing it first, and it's just a really good idea too. Again, I usually do every side quest, but you don't need to. It's just a good level boost, and you may want to do it. But that is really it for this video and what I wanted to go over. Hopefully I answered some questions for you, and is Wintertusk worth doing in of itself as a question? Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think it's worth doing? Do you agree with me? When do you usually do Wintertusk? Do you actually do it like I do right after Dragonspire, or do you wait a little bit? Do you never do it? I'm curious to know, and I'm curious to what you think. But otherwise, that is it. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.